What is going on, you guys? Theo here with the big review, back yet again with another King of Fighters All-Star video, and today we are going to be taking a look at the second installment in our series of videos ranking the top 5 FES by color element. So before we get started, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe. Helps me out a ton. We are just a few subscribers away from 500. If you have not subscribed to the channel, I see you guys down there commenting all the time. You guys are awesome. Love you all. But make sure you smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Helps me out a ton. So let's go ahead and talk about red as an element. But before we do, I want to go ahead and reiterate criteria and talk about a few things. So first and foremost, red as an element in general is a little thin. It's very top heavy. So you'll notice when we get into the top picks, those are pretty much a big gap in as far as usefulness away from some of the characters at the bottom of the list as far as their PVE viability. Red as an element in general tends to lean a little bit more to PvP, I've noticed, which is interesting, and I'm sure it's not by design, but it happens. So, you know, we are going to do our best at the bottom of this list to rank things in a fair and unbiased way, but I wanted to make sure I kind of mentioned that. The other thing I wanted to go ahead and mention, obviously, is going to be stuff we talked about in yesterday's video, which if you have not seen it, make sure you check it out. It is in the description below. But the other thing I wanted to talk about as far as this tier list and how I am doing this is kind of how I'm doing these rankings, and that is going to be obviously the same way we talked about it yesterday, which is obviously going to be first and foremost the kit of the character, and then going to be the versatility across all modes, because when you're doing a PvE tier list, it's very tough compared to PvP, which is much more condensed. Obviously, you're only considering one mode. In PvE tier lists, you're considering, you know, dozens of modes across the game, so there are a lot of things to take into account. So therefore, if a character is good in 10 different modes, but not necessarily having the best kit compared to another character that has a better kit, but is only really good in 2 modes, well, why would the character that's only good in 2 modes, but has a little bit better of a kit, be better character for PvE than the character that's good across so many more things? So that is kind of that, and then obviously ranking them next to each other. You know, certain characters, there's a lot of parity. You'll specifically see it when we get to the top of this list, where there's a lot of parity, a lot of characters in this game that are very similar to other characters. They're very similar, so when it gets to kind of that point, it can be a little bit tough. But another thing I wanted to talk about before we move on is talk about Orochi Leona here. So I had asked people yesterday for kind of a report back from them on their findings with her, if they had her built up. As you can see, mine is not built up. I never get memories for her. But I was curious to see what people's thoughts were on her in PvE overall, because I have not seen a whole lot of information out there on her yet, and obviously I am not able to take her into tier 45 at, you know, level 90. But a lot of people seem to really like her, and a lot of people seem to think that she's still not great. So I tend to think that she's still pretty decent, and I think she probably could have broken the back end of the top 5, maybe. I, however, don't like to talk about characters unless I really know exactly what I'm looking at and have been able to play around with them. You know, I don't like to report false information based on things that I have not been able to observe. So if I can't observe it, if I can't play around with it, if I can't test it, then I'm hesitant. And being that she just got buffed, I didn't want to just toss her on the back end of the list under an assumptive kind of premise. So maybe she deserves to be 5, maybe she deserves to be number 6, who knows? It's just one of those things where later on, whenever I do get lucky enough to get some memories, maybe we'll kind of revisit her, but it seems to be mixed as far as what people seem to think of her. But today we're going to be focusing on red as an element, like I said. We're going to be taking a look at the top 5 as well as an honorable mention for this color, just like we did yesterday. And, you know, at the end of the day, this is just based on my overall observation of not just myself, but many, many, many other players in the game through Discord, forums, what have you. So basically, that is going to be the way we are going to rank these characters, how we get to the decisions that we make. And let's go ahead and start with the first one, which is going to be our honorable mention. So the back end for red as an element is kind of interesting. as I had kind of mentioned, it tends to be a little bit front-loaded, top-heavy, however you want to put it. So coming in as an honorable mention here, I'm going to put Geese. So this Geese has been out for quite a long time. He's still pretty decent overall because he does have Shock Explosion on his kit. He is a attack type, so he is going to benefit from the usual leaders in that regard. But really with him, he is kind of outdated at this point. You know, really his biggest issue, and he would be a lot better if he did have a 3PG finisher to take advantage of for his card, so that does hold him back. But being that he does have Shock as well as Shock Explosion, that is very useful overall, obviously, for PvE content. The problem is you don't really see a whole lot of people use him for a whole lot of things. I've seen people use him for things like Spider Robot in the past to some kind of, you know, success, but overall, he isn't a character that I feel like deserves to crack the top 5, just because he does seem outdated. So really, when it comes to Geese, I was very back and forth with him and the person that I put in the number 5 position, because the character in the number 5 position is not necessarily built for PvE, but they're very good at PvE. Whereas Geese seems like he is built more for PvE, but he doesn't really play a whole lot of roles in it. And it's kind of interesting how that works. You know, but I will say it is a very close kind of positioning between these two. So really at the end of the day, I just fell back on how often do you see Geese used for anything really, and it was really just a situation where the character I picked for the number 5 spot just gets used more and sees a lot more play, and in my opinion does kind of have more usefulness overall. So not to say Geese is bad in any way, shape, or form. He could have easily been in the 5th position, but we're going to go ahead, put him as an honorable mention. Like I said, has great Shock Explosion, and he has really good damage for his kit overall, but again, the bigger problem with him at the end of the day is he's a little outdated and falls behind as a result to some of these newer characters. So let's go ahead and get into the top 5. Breaking into the top 5 first is going to be Mr. Karate. So Mr. Karate is the 5th pick here because of quite a few reasons. So first and foremost, if you did not watch my big review for him, then I will leave the link in the description so you can check it out. But with Mr. Karate, his biggest thing as far as PvE it goes is you'll have seen quite a few people, if you just type in, you know, look up a few runs on certain Immortals and runs in things like Time Attack, things of that nature into YouTube, you'll notice a lot of people like to use him for PvE content. And that is for a good reason. He's extremely strong in Time Attack. He's a phenomenal mobber. He is a phenomenal bosser for his damage output. He's able to cycle through his skills extremely quickly. He has a 3PG finisher that is almost impossible to get away from and is full screen. It's very similar to Nameless's 3PG. And overall, his kit does lack some of the things you would like to see. Like, you would like to see a dot here. You would like to see a little bit more penetration or defense shred, as it were. But at the end of the day, with Mr. Karate, his kit is still so strong, just based on the fact that he's a phenomenal clock stopper under a leader like KDash, that to where he does see quite a bit of play for PvE, regardless of the fact that he is seemingly more so built for PvP. So at the end of the day, I felt like he did deserve the number 5 position here, because I have just seen him used far more often in far more things and see more upside to him in PvE than I do with a Geese. Like I said, Geese and him I was kind of back and forth on because the back end of this list is a little bit thin, but at the end of the day, Mr. Karate I felt did deserve it just based on those factors as a whole. You know, at this point, he is a newer character, so his stats reflect that. His kit kind of reflects that. Like I said, for the aforementioned reasons and the aforementioned modes, you'll see him used quite a bit. He even sees use in several Immortal dungeons just as a third 4K to kind of buff for his power charge rate. So at the end of the day, for being a clock stopper, probably the premier clock stopper outside of KDash for the red element and all those other reasons, he is number 5. So let's move on to number 4. coming in at number 4 is going to be Style Keo. So Style Keo recently was buffed, and I have gotten quite a bit of time to mess around with him in various modes, and Style Keo was always a very good, strong PvE option in general before the buffs, and all the buffs really did was make him just that much better. So first and foremost with him, the thing that stands out as far from a lot of the other characters in this list is he is going to be a red balance, which makes him automatically preferable for things like reviving Hell's Dungeon whenever you are getting into the upper tiers. So with him, that is a huge boon for his kit. Now, as far as his kit is concerned, he is going to be a premier burn damage character in the game. He's actually a phenomenal link for a striker as well, if you just need a good overall generalist striker for burn damage. So he's very good for that. He's very strong with his power charge rate, especially after he got his buffs. So whenever it comes to being able to fire off his finishers quickly, if you put him, again, under a leader like a K, then he is going to be able to go in and do a ton of work with his finishers. And at the end of the day with Keo, really it just comes down to his versatility overall. You know, his power charge rate, like I said, is extremely strong. He's going to have some nice crit, he's going to have some nice burn damage on his kit, and so at the end of the day, he has a lot of the things you would generally look for a top flight PvE character in general, and being again that he is a red balance, that helps him out a ton. So yeah, I really feel like he deserves to be here. It's funny how red really sets itself apart with burn, because it does tend to be the color for burn damage in this game, and whenever we talk about burn, it is a very important dot overall to PvE players, because there are just so many different modes where it's called for. You know, even as recently as when the guild raids were released, he became a very popular pick there. So overall, Style Keo comes in at the number 4 position. But now that we've gotten through the back end of the list, let's start getting into the top end with our number 3 pick. As we get into the top 3, things get a lot easier to make decisions on. So we're going to go ahead and talk about The Rock here, who is going to be the 3rd character in the depth chart. So with The Rock, he used to be number 1. He used to be the top dog, but anymore he has started to kind of tumble just a bit. And really with The Rock, his biggest claim to fame is his finisher, as well as his excellent damage output thanks to his ridiculous bleed damage. But anymore, the problem with The Rock, which it always has been, is the fact that he is predicated predominantly upon grab skills, which does hurt his overall versatility in certain modes. Now, if you have been paying attention over the course of the past few months since the Immortals were dropped, you will notice that he is used there quite a bit. Anymore, he has started to kind of, you know, he sees varied play compared to what you used to see him in. You used to see him on most teams for most clears, and now there are just alternatives to him. But one thing that is not replaceable really for him, or at least isn't as easily replaceable, is his finisher. Like I said, it's kind of his signature at this point. But at the end of the day, I do believe he is still extremely strong, and one of the top picks for red as an element. It's very unfortunate that, kind of as somebody had pointed out in the comments yesterday, as you get into the top of these tiers now, you'll notice kind of invariably that most of the characters in the top 2 or 3 are going to be either collab or boss syndrome, and that is what it is. I'm not going to get into the finer points of that, but with The Rock here, you know, really at the end of the day, the biggest thing that you are going to be using him for is, like I said, as a clock stopper and for his bleed. Just make sure if you're taking him into a dungeon where the grabs are not going to necessarily be the best, that you are being kind of careful with how you're using him. But really at the end of the day, that has never held him back a ton, and as I see it, he is definitely deserving of the 3rd position on this list. And now, without further ado, let's go ahead and move into the top 2. That rhymed. Huh. So, I'm not going to lie. I actually I was a little bit iffy on where I wanted to put Mr. KDash here. So KDash, I feel, is the second best red element pick in the game for PvE, and it was tough only because he definitely has become the best leader for red, with his leadership skill being the increase to red fighters' attack by 45% and their power charge rate by 20%. Very, very good. Very, very strong. His skills, extremely good. He's very fast. That's kind of his shtick. He's just super fast. He's going to go in there, fire off finishers like crazy, because he has great power charge rate as well. Not as good as some of the other characters that you might see on this list, but it is very good, especially considering the fact that he's a character that in PvE you actually predominantly want to use his 5PG, not his 3PG, and being that he can make a 5PG viable and not be a problem and make it one of the better clock stop maneuvers in the game, just kind of goes to show how quick he is at doing the things he needs to do. But I did feel like, just based on certain other factors, the character that we picked for number one was more deserving at the end of the day. But you'll see in his kit, he has a ton of burn damage output. He has a fantastic leadership skill, like we said. You go into his cores here, he's going to have penetration, he's going to have more burn damage, he's going to decrease his damage received. Now, he does have quite a few cores that are PvP focused, so he is going to have some cores in here that aren't necessarily geared towards his usefulness in PvE, which is the subject at hand. But at the end of the day, with K, he really is the best overall leader for things like Immortal dungeons and anything where you need to be able to block the clock, stop the clock, slow things down, take your time, and fire off as much damage as possible in a short amount of time. You know, he really is the premier leader for that. So at the end of the day, with that leadership skill, with the amount of burn damage he has, with the fantastic 5PG finisher that he has, which is still kind of strange to talk about considering the fact that we usually don't talk about 5PG finishers being fantastic, but it's so long that it is. So at the end of the day, K, great overall pick. He is a red defense. If he were a red balance, I think he would probably be number one, but that would still be arguable. But then again, the character that is number one is so similar to him in so many different ways that, I mean, you can kind of just take your pick. But like I said, somebody has to be number one, somebody has to be number two. K, in this positioning, he's number two, but it is what it is. That doesn't make him bad. That doesn't make him anything but just a really great character. And yeah, definitely deserving of being on this list in this position. So let's go ahead and move on to our number one pick, which probably shouldn't surprise anyone. Coming in at number one is obviously going to be Rachel. So with Rachel, really the reason why she is going to be here, there's a couple. So if you compare her and K side by side, right? Again, they're very similar characters in what they're trying to accomplish. Now, I will say that K probably edges her in the leadership department, obviously, being that he buffs power charge rate, and she does not, but she also has a much higher increase to attack than his, so, you know, it really depends on what you're trying to go for, but I think 9 times out of 10, K is going to be the leader. So that's one thing. The other thing is Rachel is a balance type, and as I had previously mentioned with K, if he were a balance type, that would help his kind of overall versatility quite a bit in PvE, because that would make him a great character for the Reviving Hells dungeon. As it sits as a defense character for K, he's still a good RHD character because it calls for defensive characters quite a bit, but then once you get into the highest tiers where it's calling for specific colors and typing, he starts to kind of fall out of favor with that. Whereas Rachel has that viability and also is doing a lot of the things that he's doing as well. Now, obviously, her finisher is not going to be as crazy fast or as crazy long, rather, but it is faster. So it's one of those things where she has a 3PG finisher, and she also has the 7 Knights stones to kind of buff up her skills and her damage output and her stats. So yeah, at the end of the day, they're very similar, but the other thing to kind of mention here, and this is kind of a wash because she's a collab, but she is a free-to-play character, So yeah, there's a lot to take in there, and at the end of the day, I think that because most people do prefer to have collab characters as far as if they have to build them for PvE purposes anyway, because they do tend to be a little more expensive, but a little bit easier to build. That's kind of the trade-off there. Yes, it requires more memories to build them at the end of the day because you're making invites, but you are going to be able to do it a little bit easier because you're not going for just straight-up dupes constantly. So there's a lot to kind of unpack with that, but I do feel like it is very close between the two, but I don't think it's close enough to where I could have put Kay above her. So really with Rachel, she's going to have wonderful damage. She's going to have wonderful burn apps. You know, when you look through her kit here, she's got a very tight kit. She also has that last core there where she basically has a built-in Akane, and she also has the PVE exclusive on it that recovers her HP by 30% when it's 20 or less. So she has a lot of sustain at the end of the day as well. So I definitely feel like she is the best overall red FES for PvE purposes. Again, if we were talking PvP, this would be a completely different conversation. But as far as PvE is concerned, Rachel is definitely the best. And if you look at these characters at the end of the day, as I had mentioned at the beginning of the video, red as an element doesn't have a bad pool necessarily. It just doesn't have the strongest pool in the world. You know, some of these characters are starting to get old. Some of these characters need a little bit of a buff. But really, red has a lot of PvP-focused characters. So, you know, when you take a look at characters like Lady Big, you know, she's a straight-up PvP character. She really doesn't have a ton of usefulness in PvE. She's usable, but I wouldn't necessarily ever say that she is a top-flight recommendation. So, yeah, at the end of the day, red, not necessarily the thickest pool for PvE content. There is stuff there that is useful, but I do think that other pools, other elements, other colors have kind of a better overall kind of list of characters for this type of content. But I digress. That's the tier list, guys. Let me know in the comments below if you feel like another character should have been on here, if you feel like the positioning of some of these characters was off. You know, like I said, I was a little back and forth myself on the number 5 and the number 4 position, but, you know, at the end of the day, I feel like that was kind of where it lined up just based on overall usefulness and versatility, kind of falling back on the criteria of how we're ranking these characters, you know, as they measure up to each other, the rest of their peers, their versatility across all modes, and then, obviously, some of the other factors that we have talked about previously. So, let me know in the comments below what you guys think. Make sure you smash that like button and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.